Well, welcome once again. This is the Doctor of Digital from the Doctor of Digital podcast. The purpose of the show is to be transformative. I introduce busy business executives and leaders to trends in business, marketing your message, technology, and anything that you want to know in the shortest amount of time to highlight people you should know. Did you know the massive Filipino contribution to the economy? Over 99% of businesses in the Philippines are micro, small, and medium enterprises, employing about 60% of the workforce. This entrepreneurial spirit of the strong presence is a defining features of the business landscape. There is a rapid adoption of technology and a digital acceleration. The Philippines boasts the highest internet penetration in Southeast Asia and rapid growth in e-commerce. With a skilled global talent hub of English speaking, young, and educated professionals, the Philippines is a global destination for business process outsourcing. Filipino virtual assistants offer high quality services at significantly lower rates compared to other countries. Do you want to know how to be cost effective and obtain affordable support without compromising quality? Well, listen in because during this episode, that's what you're going to hear. We'll discuss the changes and hot topics in the Philippines and with virtual assistants. Let's navigate these waters to better understand these areas and to see how they can work for you. By the end of this episode, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to my guests, and my special guest today is a VA expert, LeAn. So, LeAn, thank you for being a guest today. I appreciate your time. And how are you doing today?
I'm really good, Vic. That was a really good introduction. I really liked how you said that. I was like listening in every word. That was really cool.
Well, that's good because I want to talk about things that people need to know about. And I think you're just the person to be talking about it. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into the field in the first place? You have a very interesting background.
Well, I started when I was 15 years old, and I always start with that because, like, when I was 15 years old, that was 2011. So you can guess my age. And it started off as me writing content for a lot of people, and it
Okay.
was a thing where it was freelancing from the Philippines wasn't even a thing. PayPal wasn't even servicing the Philippines at that point. But I found a way to be able to get paid and get jobs, and I did video editing, graphic artist. I landed a job as a book editor for this publishing company in the US, and their founders actually flew into Cebu, Philippines, where I'm at, and I got to know them. I ended up even living with them because I was living in this very almost like bathroom. I think my current bathroom right now is that small of a room that I used to live in when I because I moved here from another city, and they were like, "Okay, you should probably move in with us because we have an extra room." And I got adopted to them, and I learned entrepreneurship basically from my boss at that time,
Nice.
and I learned about outsourcing. I learned about like how to delegate. I learned about basically how to manage everything remotely because everyone was working from home as well. And it got to a point where I started running his publishing company. Like I got trained up to become CEO. And then at 23 years old, I was like, oh, I think I want to start my own business.
Nice.
And then I was like talking about it of like, I think I want to like leave. And he's like, why do you need to leave? Like we can just start the business together. And he gave me like lots of options. And one of them was starting a virtual assistant agency. So we started first as a course basically on how to hire an assistant from the Philippines, spoke on different stages. At one point, someone just came up to us. Well, it happened a couple of times, but at one point, someone seriously came up to us and said, hey, can instead of me just learning this from you, can you just do this for me? And so we were like, okay, we've now proven that people actually need this, and we kind of started to XU from then. And like it's been 4 years basically since that happened. So it's been a fun ride.
That's good. It's an exciting and interesting journey. So it goes back some time. And I'm wondering now, I'm curious, what are the changes that you've seen? Because certainly the scenes have changed pretty significantly. So, what would you say and identify some of the changes that have taken place?
Well, the biggest one is because of the pandemic, is that people are now more accepting of it. Like it's now a real job. Like for years and years, for the first couple of years in my 20s, my mom didn't even believe that it was a weird like a real job that I was having. Like, of course, the only image is like you go to an office or you're working overseas, basically. And in the Philippines, like if you want to create a really comfortable life for yourself, you go overseas. That's what we call it. Like that's how you earn the dollar, instead of just earning the peso. So for a few years there, I struggled with that of like the societal expectations. And then when we were hiring ourselves, people were confused that we didn't have an office. People were confused that everyone was work from home. So that has shifted a lot of like people now are accepting of it. People are now even like, oh, I don't even hire locally anymore. I just outsource to the Philippines. And it has become easier for me to sell and pitch basically my business as well. And at the same time, it's people just gotten more comfortable on it. Like people are now used to using Zoom. There's not really a lot of that gap anymore of like, oh, it's weird. I've never met this person in like in real life. But so far Zoom has been enough. So there's a lot of changes in literally just the last 4 years in this space because of pandemic and also people just more seeing it as a reality instead of an option.
Right. And would you say what kind of changes that have taken place, but in terms of topics or hot topics, I mean, what would you say are some of the things you can identify for businesses so that they know like what should be people should be concerned about or thinking about currently?
Well, when it comes to outsourcing, like, and you said it earlier in your introduction as well, is like, one of the usually the most polarizing thing is that they say like, oh, if you're hired from the Philippines, you don't have to hire someone at the minimum wage of $11 an hour because here $11 an hour is I think it's right now times seven to our minimum wage. Our current minimum wage, if I remember right now, because there was a hike, is about $2 an hour. That's our minimum wage here. But $2 an hour, of course, is not even enough to like feed yourself. So if you imagine that if you paid someone else in the Philippines the minimum wage in the U.S., they're already living a kind of a good life already. That's kind of the difference. Like here, the example my business partner from the U.S. always use is that here in the Philippines, to get your tooth taken out, it takes like $10 to get it done, and it will be done well, like in a really nice office with this dentist who's done so many conferences and talks and everything else. Versus, of course, when you in the U.S., it's like $100, $500 to get your tooth done. So there's that difference in way of living as well that makes it a difference of like if you pay someone the same rate that you're paying someone who might not have a lot of the experience, but in the Philippines they've been becoming a virtual assistant for 5 6 years, that already is an upgrade in their life again versus like you just hiring someone locally.
Gotcha. So, what would you recommend a business owner that's a person in the United States and maybe some of the fears and anxieties of what they might kind of encounter, or some typical examples of a person reaching out? Well, what can you do and how can you help companies and what would you recommend?
So for 2XU, the biggest advantage that we bring in is one is just expertise on recruitment. We've since for me, even this June, I've been recruiting people for 10 years. And it's weird to say because I'm only 28, but I've been literally doing this since I was 18 because I was able to start early. So we bring in that expertise of like, we know how to filter people because it's always a fear when you're hiring someone, especially overseas, of like, are they even real or just going to
Yeah.
scam me? The other thing, of course, is like how am I going to pay them? How am I going to make sure that it actually arrives on their account? How to make sure that they have an actual laptop or Wi-Fi connection, or all the minute things that usually you don't really think about if you're hiring someone in person. And the other thing is that we create like a structure. Like when you are onboarded with an assistant, you don't have to think about making sure they have the right tools, making sure that they have X, Y, and Z, like task tracker, setting up ring procedures. We set that up basically because when you are starting with an assistant, people usually think like, oh, now I have an assistant. Now my life is easier. But you have to put in the work to train them. You have to put in the work to like get them to be we call them become your second brain. That's why we call our company 2XU. So there's a lot of that work, and we set that up basically so that our clients are set up for that success. So they'd have to skip basically the many, many mistakes that we've had to go through in building up 2XU to where it is at this point.
Do you people, are they concerned about things like not really knowing the Philippines? And I think one of the things they say, well, it's a foreign country, it is from the States, but they may not realize that how prevalent English is and how knowledgeable people are and how entrepreneurial they are. So are those some of the limitations or some of the barriers that they find?
Yes, and the biggest thing that I always tell them is literally English is taught in school here. Like it's our second language. Like our subjects from high school is like math, Filipino, which so we teach our own language, history, and English, and of course science and arts and everything else. So, but English is an actual subject that we are taught, and every single year we have like a lot of Koreans, a lot of Japanese, a lot of other cultures coming here to be taught English. So that's how prevalent written and spoken English is here, just because for years and years and years we've been like catering and taking care of other foreigners coming here. Like our my now business partner, my used to be my boss, he's been here 10 years. He knows 5 words of like our language. The rest he's just been speaking to everyone in English. Like that's my always my best example is like you don't have to, because we're so a part of our culture is we're so accommodating, we're so helpful
Yeah.
that we just have we learn or we drown basically on when it comes to learning the language. So that's one. The other thing is always like skills, like how to actually know if they're a better art graphic artist, for example, than someone in the US. It's the same kind of skill. Like I've even said this before, like a little bit Filipinos, a little bit better, just because we're kind of artistically, it's part of our like gene maybe of like being artistic. But you do have to verify. You have to double check if that person actually matches like your brand or your company on their skill. So there's a lot of different things that you do have to check, but it's basically the same as like hiring someone across the street from you. They just might not have the same pure experiences as you, because different culture, but it's practically that way.
And probably and prevalent of knowing some other cultures. It has to do a lot with the history of the Philippines because the Spanish were there for a long time,
Mhm.
Americans were there for a long time, and I think
Mhm.
where you're saying is that Filipinos tend to be very outgoing and receptive because foreigners have been there for a long time, and the language and the culture has also been a part of the Philippines.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah.
What are some of the limitations that are barriers? And I think I want to go back to the point that you were making. Is that, well, they're going to outsource it. The VA now does everything for me. But I think what you're saying and suggesting, I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more about that, because you have to train a person just like you would for any staff person who was sitting next to you or in your office with you.
So the biggest thing that I always tell people is never think of your VA as a unicorn. Like we always like people always hear me say like, oh, for my assistant, she does graphics for me. She does, she emails clients for me. Like yesterday, she amazing. It's still fresh in my head. She amazingly followed up with the client and said like, oh yeah, I ordered. I thank you for follow up. I just paid the deposit. I'm like, thank you for doing that. Like she does that for me. And she takes care of like different operations in the business, but she didn't start off that way. Like when you're hiring an assistant, don't think of them like they're going to do everything in your business.
Mm.
Just because you wear multiple hats as an entrepreneur doesn't mean that your assistant has to. So pick 3 things. Like I always say, just 3 outcomes that you want the assistant to focus on. And eventually it'll come up where they will learn different things from you and show off like, oh, I can take care of that. Like I'll do that for you. Um, it's a gradual thing. It's like just focus on 3 main outcomes. My assistant started with content because I make so much content on YouTube, on TikTok, everywhere else, that she focused on that, and then she turned into like taking care of client and operations as I focused on it. So the cool thing is like wherever you focus and you bring your assistant, they start learning those skills as well. And another thing that I always tell people is that as we're talking about, Filipinos are always helpful and outgoing. They usually start off shy. They usually start off like very reserved a little bit, and they're not really sure footing. When I was starting out, one term that I was surprised to learn was there's something called the disappearing Filipino trick. And I didn't believe it until it happened to me, where I was interviewing someone and the client asked a fairly difficult question, and then they dropped off the call and never responded and nothing. Like I tried to call them on the phone, nothing. So there's things like that where you have to keep in mind that working with an assistant, yes, they're used to working with foreigners, but there will be times where kind of culturally we're ingrained in us is a little bit of shame. a lot of shame. So if we're faced with something that we don't know or we're not sure about, we would rather cower a little bit in between until you gain that back and forth trust basically with the assistant. Like, no, it's like in 2 weeks, you always say it's okay to fail. Like when you fail, you learn something. If you fail and you don't learn something, that's not okay. But if you
Right.
fail and then you get up and you do it. So I've created that environment and that culture. But again, that's not always ingrained. That's not for different employers. It might be like, oh, if you fail, you're done. Like that's it. I'm not even talking to you anymore. So then, of course, that's scary because the moment that they lose one income, you might be talking to a single mom, and that's their only source of income, or you're talking to the breadwinner of the family. So most of the time in the Philippines, like the eldest daughter, like myself, is the breadwinner of like the rest of the siblings, putting them through college and all of that. So there's always that fear of like, okay, if I lose this one client, I'm done. That's it. Like I can't show up anymore for my family. So you have to keep those little things in mind of like the differences in the culture as well, when it comes to working with assistants in the Philippines.
So it's probably more family oriented too in a lot of ways because it's part of Filipino culture, right? So I mean,
Mhm.
you kind of react or think in terms of a family, so that's very different a cultural approach.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. I guess it's a little bit shame based, and we're surrounded by our family almost all the time. Even when even if you get married and have kids, most of the time you have a house in your family compound. So
Mhm.
it's that interconnectedness that you always have to keep in mind when it comes to working Filipinos.
In some ways, it's just to make a cultural point. In some ways, in some communities in the United States, it is that way, particularly in the eastern seaboard, where there are neighborhoods and families, and people are like all around each other. But for most Americans, that's kind of the things that the way it used to be because we move around. We're a very mobile population. But it's an interesting thing to know and to be aware of the cross cultural issues that might crop up and might come up
Yeah.
in these kinds of instances. And again, Americans tend to be very forward and
Mhm.
straightforward, and they speak directly. And that sometimes is a cultural problem because a person then
Mhm.
kind of reacts, negatively
Yeah,
or they hide.
we're
Like,
not used to
guessing.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Since there are a lot of companies and there are a lot of VAs, could you say something about what your expertise is and the kinds of services that you offer? So if a person is listening, they have some sense of what it is that you do.
It's funny because like I was trying to figure that out myself like a few days ago of like what is the thing that we provide. Of course, like when you're New Year's, it's always like existential crisis basically. And I the word that came out was clarity. Like the biggest thing that we provide is clarity. Like we make sure that there's clarity on the tasks that you do, because that's the first thing that people make mistakes in, is just because they hate sales, to delegate that first, and that's how your company goes under. The second thing is we provide clarity on systems. Like a lot of people think systems is boring. I get excited about systems. I get nerdy out about systems. But when you build systems, then that's how you create repeatable results in your business, by creating assets, starting up your procedures, the quote unquote boring stuff that actually helps you be ready for getting 10 clients tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the third thing is clarity on basically where you want to spend your time on, because of course as you're an assistant, like things get taken off of your plate. You don't have to do the thing that you've been kind of dreading to do this whole time. And then you start getting clarity of like, for me, like I didn't know that I like speaking or being on podcasts or being on stages until I started getting freed up to do it. And last year I spoke on a stage almost every single month, which was really
Wow.
really cool.
Yeah.
And it's because my assistant basically takes care of everything else in the background, and I am freed up enough to be able to do it. So it's clarity on task, systems, and then where you actually want to spend your time. So then you can either focus on growing your business or maintaining a status quo, because that's the lifestyle that you want to have.
Yeah, it's really interesting and informative to know because if you concentrate on business processes, I like your phrase that if you have the process down, you're going to get repeatable results and you're going to get improvement, which businesses are looking for. How to be more efficient, how to do things cheaper, how to do things better is always a solid business goal.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Now, if a person was trying to reach out to you, I'm wondering what would they do and how do they get in touch with you? Because I think this is a really growing area. I think there's more of awareness of people using VAs and the advantage of them. So, what would you suggest that they do if they're curious about what your services are?
So the first place that I always point people to is we have a scorecard. So it takes 2 minutes basically, and it gives you that first dose of clarity basically of like what are the things that you need on the task side, system side, and then freeing your time side. So it's 2xu.com/scorecard basically to do it. It's super quick. And then afterwards, if you do want to end up like setting up a call, depending on the results, then the button's there. But
Mm.
I always, instead of getting someone like, okay, just hop on a call with me, like, no, assess yourself, see if you're even ready to have an assistant in your business, because I always say never hire someone if you just got your first dollar. Have someone when you have the recurring way to pay someone every single month, because they're going to be dependent on you. So the scorecard is a really good way to just
Oh,
see if you are at that stage or you're still too much in the beginning that having a VA might not even make sense.
outstanding. Do you have contact information you could supply and people can reach out? How would they get a hold of you?
Yep. So I am everywhere basically. I also teach basically on YouTube on how to hire and how to manage a
Oh,
virtual assistant. So if just to a beginner kind of content, I have a lot of those on my YouTube. I think I've been doing it 4 years now. This March, I think. And for other ways, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram or X now. I'm literally everywhere. Or of course, like just checking out 2XU, 2xyou.com is going to be the fastest way to reach us.
so if they can't find you, it's not that you're hiding. Is that what you're saying?
No, they can't find me. And my name is really unique too. Like if you find it on Google,
That's true.
it's my mom picked a really good name. It's easy for me to it's easier to find me. If you don't find me, it's probably in a weird dark space. So yeah.
Well, it's got a wealth of information. I appreciate your time and taking some time out of your busy schedule. I appreciate the tips and the hints that you've given, and hopefully people will reach out. It's really been a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, Meg.
You bet. Well, that was a great episode, and hopefully you learned as much as I did. I think you got to start looking toward the places where people can help you. You know, if you're interested in knowing more about business and how to improve your company, I hope you tune in to the Doctor of Digital podcast and make sure that you subscribe, and also do what you can to share it with other people as well. Until next time, this is the Doctor of Digital signing off. Until next time, Deus Volt.